The doctor said my daughter had 1 week to live. Then he said there was one person on earth who could save her. Then he said the name, and I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes right before you break. Daniel Smith. The billionaire who told me 9 years ago that becoming a father would interfere with the IPO. The man who wired me money like that could replace showing up. Now the universe was asking him a question. Was his empire worth more than his daughter's life? He didn't know he had a daughter, and he was about to find out in the worst possible way. The monitor beside Elizabeth's bed beeped in an uneven rhythm. Not the steady pulse I'd memorized over 8 years of hospital stays. This was different, slower, struggling. I pressed my palm against the cold glass wall of the pediatric cardiac unit, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there, and watched my daughter sleep. Her chest rose and fell with effort, like even breathing had become a battle she wasn't sure she could win anymore. Her blonde hair was spread across the pillow, too thin now. The nurses said it was the medication, but I knew better. It was exhaustion. Her body was tired of fighting. "Mrs. Taylor?" Dr. Ellis's voice came from behind me, soft, careful, like he was approaching someone standing on the edge of a cliff. I didn't turn around, because I already knew what that tone meant. "How long?" I asked. The silence that followed was an answer in itself. I heard him take a step closer, felt him hesitate. That pause, that awful, suffocating pause, was worse than any words he could have said. "Mary," he said finally, his voice gentler now, "we need to talk about Elizabeth's options." Options. That word used to mean choices, possibilities, paths you could take. But when your 8-year-old daughter has a heart condition so rare, most cardiologists only read about it in textbooks, options becomes a polite way of saying we're running out of time. If you've ever stood in a hospital hallway waiting for news you didn't want to hear, you know this feeling. That moment when hope and dread sit in your chest like stones. If you're watching this and you've been there, or you know someone who has, stay with me, because what comes next, you'll want to hear. And if this story moves you the way I hope it will, subscribe, not for me. For every mother who's ever had to fight for her child when the world said there was nothing left to fight with. I finally looked at him. Dr. Ellis had kind eyes, the kind that had delivered bad news so many times they'd learned how to carry sorrow without drowning in it. His white coat was wrinkled. There was a coffee stain near the pocket. I noticed these things because I couldn't let myself focus on his face. "She's not responding to medication anymore," he said quietly. "The structural abnormality in her heart is progressing faster than we anticipated." "Faster," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "How much faster?" He folded his hands in front of him, a gesture that felt rehearsed, like something they teach you in medical school when you have to tell a parent their child is running out of time. "Days," he said. "A week at most." The floor tilted beneath me. Not months, not even weeks anymore. Days. I grabbed the edge of the nurse's station to steady myself. My vision blurred at the edges. Somewhere down the hall, a phone was ringing. Someone laughed. Life was continuing like the world wasn't ending. But mine was. "What do we do?" I whispered. Dr. Ellis glanced at the chart in his hands, then back at me. "Transplant," he said. "It's her only chance." Transplant. The word I'd been both praying for and dreading since Elizabeth turned 5 and her condition worsened. The word that meant hope and risk, and a waiting list that stretched longer than time allowed. "Okay," I said, straightening my spine the way I'd learned to do when the world tried to break me. "Put her on the list. We'll wait. We'll do whatever." "Mary." The way he said my name stopped me cold. Dr. Ellis's face shifted, and I saw something there I couldn't quite name. Sympathy? Concern? Dread? "It's not that simple," he said. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean it's not simple?" I demanded. "You said transplant, so we transplant. We find a donor. Elizabeth's genetic profile is extraordinarily rare," he interrupted gently. "The donor would need to match not just blood type and tissue markers, but a specific chromosomal sequence that occurs in fewer than 0.02% of the global population." I stared at him. The hallway felt like it was narrowing, What are you saying? He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take before you say something that will change someone's life. I'm saying there may only be one viable donor match in the world. The words landed like a punch. One. Not a waiting list of hundreds. Not a national registry of hope. One person out of 8 billion. I laughed. It came out sharp and hollow, a sound that didn't belong to me. One? I said, my voice rising. You're telling me my daughter's life depends on finding one specific person on this entire planet? Now pay close attention to what happens next, because this is the moment where everything I thought I knew about strength got tested. If you've ever had the universe hand you an impossible choice, hit that like button. Not because this is easy to watch, but because you understand that some stories need to be told. Some battles need witnesses. We've already run the cross-reference through the International Donor Database, Dr. Ellis said carefully. There's a match on file. Hope flared in my chest. Bright, desperate, painful. Who? I asked, stepping toward him. Where are they? Can we contact them? How fast can we? Mary. He said my name like a warning. And that's when I knew. Before he even said it, I knew. Something in his expression, something in the way he was looking at me like I was fragile, told me that the answer wasn't going to be simple. It was going to be complicated, and complicated was the last thing I could afford. The match, Dr. Ellis said slowly, is Daniel Smith. Time stopped. The monitor kept beeping. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse called out a room number. But inside that moment, inside the space between his words and my understanding, everything went silent. Daniel Smith. The name I hadn't spoken aloud in 9 years. The name I'd buried so deep, I'd convinced myself it didn't have power over me anymore. Daniel Smith. The man who'd held my hand on a rooftop, under the stars, and promised me forever. The man who'd looked at me with fear in his eyes when I told him I was pregnant and said, "This isn't the right time, Mary. The company is about to go public. I can't do this right now." As if love operated on a business schedule. As if our child was a quarterly earnings obstacle. The man who'd wired $50,000 into my account a week later, like money could replace him showing up. I'd sent it back, every cent. Because I didn't want his guilt. I wanted his presence. And when he didn't fight for me, when he didn't call, didn't show up, didn't choose us, I walked away, with nothing but my dignity and a secret growing inside me. Elizabeth's father. "No," I whispered. Dr. Ellis didn't respond. He just stood there, holding that chart, giving me space to process the impossible. "Not him," I said, louder now. "Anyone but him." But the universe doesn't offer alternatives when it's already made up its mind. I turned back to the glass. Elizabeth was still sleeping. Her small hand was curled around the stuffed rabbit I'd given her when she was 3. The one with the floppy ear she refused to let me sew back on because she said it made him special. She looked so small, so fragile, so innocent. She didn't know about Daniel. She'd asked, of course. Children always do. "Where's my daddy?" And I'd given her the only truth I could bear to tell. "He wasn't ready to be a father, sweetheart, but you don't need to worry about that. I love you enough for both of us." She'd hugged me then, kissed my cheek, and said, "Okay, Mama." Children are resilient like that. But the question never fully went away. I'd see it sometimes in her eyes when she watched other kids with their fathers at the park. When Father's Day came around and her classmates made cards. She never asked twice. But she wondered. I knew she did. Here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt you in the moment. It reshapes your entire future. Every decision you make afterward carries the weight of what someone else did to you. If you've ever had to protect your child from the truth because the truth was too cruel, leave a comment. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Because this part of the story, this is where it gets harder. And I need you to know you're not the only one who's had to be strong when you want it to fall apart. Has he been contacted? I asked, my voice flat. Not yet, Dr. Ellis said. We wanted to speak with you first, given the circumstances. Circumstances. That was a polite word. For the father who abandoned you is the only thing standing between your daughter and a grave. I pressed my forehead against the glass. It was cold, grounding. Behind me, I could feel Dr. Ellis waiting. The clock on the wall ticked forward. Elizabeth's monitor continued its uneven rhythm, a sound I would hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life if this didn't work. And somewhere across the city, in a tower of steel and glass and ambition, Daniel Smith was living a life that didn't include us. A life where he was the golden boy, the tech genius, the billionaire CEO whose face was on magazine covers and conference stages. The company had gone public 6 months after I left him, made him a billionaire overnight. Forbes called him the visionary who revolutionized cloud infrastructure. I called him the man who chose code over his child, a life where he got to be the hero of his own story. While I sat in hospitals, while I held our daughter's hand through surgeries, while I whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But that life, his life, was about to collide with ours. Whether he was ready or not. "I'll contact him," I said finally. Dr. Ellis nodded slowly. "Mary, I know this is—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't tell me you know. You don't. Nobody does." He fell silent. I looked at Elizabeth one more time, her chest rising and falling, her small fingers clutching that rabbit, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been when she was awake lately. She deserved to live. She deserved prom dresses and college acceptance letters and a wedding day and grandchildren of her own. She deserved Friday movie nights and road trips and arguments over curfews and all the beautiful, ordinary chaos of a full life. She deserved a future. And if getting her that future meant walking back into the past that nearly destroyed me, if it meant facing the man who'd chosen a boardroom over a baby, if it meant swallowing every ounce of pride I had left and begging the person who'd hurt me most, then that's exactly what I'd do. What would you do? If saving the person you loved most meant facing the person who hurt you deepest? I want you to think about that. Really think about it. Because what happens next? When I walk into his world after all these years, it's going to test everything you think you know about pride and love and what we're willing to sacrifice. If you're still with me, if you need to know what happens when desperation meets betrayal, subscribe right now. Because this story doesn't end where you think it does. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about being a mother. You don't get to choose between your pride and your child's life. There is no choice. There's only what you'll do, and what you won't survive if you don't. The man who once broke my heart was the only one who could save my daughters. And I'd burn every bridge I'd ever built if it meant Elizabeth got to walk into tomorrow. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking. I hadn't looked at Daniel's contact information in 9 years. I'd deleted his number the day I walked away, but I'd kept it written down, tucked in the back of an old journal I never opened, just in case. I never thought just in case would actually come. Dr. Ellis cleared his throat softly. "Do you want me to arrange a formal meeting through the hospital's transplant coordinator? We can—" "No," I said. "This needs to come from me." Because if I was going to ask Daniel Smith to save our daughter's life, if I was going to stand in front of the man who'd broken me and beg, then I was going to do it on my terms, not through a coordinator, not through lawyers or hospital administrators. Face to face. The way he should have done 9 years ago when he chose to walk away. I looked at Elizabeth one last time through the glass. "I'm going to fix this, baby," I whispered. "I promise." Even though I had no idea if I could keep that promise, even though the man I was about to face had already proven he knew how to break them. What Daniel doesn't know yet is that I'm coming. And when I walk into his glass tower with our daughter's life in my hands, everything he's built, every carefully constructed wall, every calculated decision, it's all about to come crashing down. Stay with me, because the confrontation that's coming, you're going to want to see this. Share this story with someone who needs to know that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight for the people we love. Sometimes strength looks like swallowing your pride. And sometimes justice comes in forms you never expected. I turned away from the glass, walked down that sterile hallway with its fluorescent lights and smell of antiseptic, pushed through the double doors into the cold December afternoon, and pulled out my phone. My finger hovered over the search bar. Daniel Smith CEO contact information. It took 3 seconds to find his office address, Smith Technologies, downtown, 47th floor. Of course, it was the 47th floor. Men like Daniel always built their empires in the sky, far enough above the world that they didn't have to see the damage they left behind. But he was going to see it now. He was going to see her. Our daughter. The child he'd never met. The little girl with his eyes and my stubbornness and a heart that was running out of time. I stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital, the winter wind cutting through my jacket, and made a decision that would change all of our lives. I was going to walk into Daniel Smith's perfect world, and I was going to shatter it. I know what some of you are thinking. Why would you go back to him? Why would you give him that power? And I need you to understand something. This isn't about power. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about a mother who will do anything, to save her child. If that resonates with you, if you've ever had to make an impossible choice, leave a comment and tell me. Tell me what you would do. Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. And if you're here because you believe in stories where women don't give up, where mothers fight even when the odds are impossible, then subscribe. Be part of this journey with me. Because what happens next? When I walk into that building? When I stand in front of the man who destroyed me and say the words, "Elizabeth is dying, and you're the only one who can save her?" That's when the real story begins. That's when we find out who Daniel Smith really is. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the man on magazine covers, but the man who has to choose, really choose, between his life and hers, between his comfort and her survival, between the empire he built and the daughter he never knew existed. And here's what you need to know. The answer he gives won't be the one you expect, because betrayal is complicated, redemption is messy, and sometimes, the people who hurt us are also the only ones who can save us. So stay with me, because in the next part of this story, I'm going to walk into Daniel Smith's glass empire with nothing but the truth and a photograph of our daughter. And what he does, what he says, it's going to test everything I thought I knew about the man I once loved and the stranger he became. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. Comment below and tell me, do you think people can change? Can someone who walked away when it mattered most actually show up when everything is on the line? I'll see you in the next chapter. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the man who broke my heart finally meets the daughter who might break his. I didn't go to his office that day. I went home first. Because there are some battles you can't fight in sweatpants and yesterday's mascara. And walking into Daniel Smith's empire required armor. The apartment was quiet when I got back. Too quiet. The kind of silence that only exists when the person who fills your world with noise isn't there. Elizabeth's coloring books were still scattered across the coffee table. Her pink sneakers, the ones with the lights in the heels, sat by the door where she'd kicked them off 3 days ago, before the ambulance came. Before terminal became a word I couldn't unhear. I picked up one of her drawings from the couch. It was us. Me and her. 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun that took up half the page. She'd written across the top in wobbly letters, "Me and Mama forever." My throat closed. I set the drawing down carefully like it was made of glass. Then I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind clothes I hadn't worn in years, was a box. I hadn't opened it since the day I left Daniel. But I needed it now, because inside that box was the only photograph I'd kept of us. And if I was going to face him, if I was going to ask him to save our daughter's life, I needed to remember who we were before everything fell apart. I sat on the edge of my bed and lifted the lid. The photograph was on top. Daniel and me, 9 years ago. Before the money, before the empire, before the betrayal that would redefine both our lives. We were on the beach. Golden hour. His arm around my shoulders. My head tilted toward his. Both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. He looked so young. We both did. 24 and 23. Foolish and fearless and convinced we had forever. If you've ever looked at an old photograph and barely recognized the person you used to be, you understand this moment. That strange grief of realizing the life you thought you'd have died somewhere along the way. If this is hitting close to home, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the numbers, but because these stories, the hard ones, the messy ones, the ones about women who survive the unsurvivable, they need to be told. And you need to be here for what comes next. I met Daniel Smith at a coffee shop. Not a boardroom, not a gala, not some glossy origin story that would later get repackaged for investor presentations. A coffee shop on 5th Street that played too loud indie music and served lattes in chipped mugs. I was a graduate student. Literature. Drowning in student loans and thesis drafts and dreams of becoming a writer who actually got paid. He was building a tech startup in his friend's garage. Working 18-hour days. Surviving on caffeine and ambition and a refusal to accept that most startups fail. "Is this seat taken?" he'd asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. The cafe was half empty. He could have sat anywhere. But he chose my table. I should have known then that Daniel Smith was the kind of man who saw what he wanted and reached for it without hesitation. "It's all yours," I'd said, not looking up from my laptop. He sat down. 5 minutes later, he asked what I was working on. 10 minutes after that, we were debating whether technology would save or destroy human connection. An hour after that, I'd forgotten I had a thesis deadline. He had this way of looking at you, like you were the only person in the room, the only person who mattered. It's a gift, that kind of focus. And a weapon. We started dating 2 weeks later. He'd pick me up after class in a car that was one breakdown away from the junkyard. We'd drive to overlooks and talk about the future like it was a place we were both headed together. "I'm going to build something that matters," he told me once, his hand in mine, the city lights spread out below us. "Something that changes the world." "I believe you," I'd said. And I did. But here's what I didn't understand then. Some men can only love you when you're part of the dream. The moment you become a complication, you become disposable. Daniel's company started gaining traction. First a small investor, then a larger one, then venture capital firms circling like sharks who'd caught the scent of blood in the water. He was working 20-hour days, sleeping at the office, missing dinners, canceling plans. "Just until the next funding round," he'd say. "Then it'll slow down." It never slowed down. Success has a gravity of its own. The closer you get, the harder it pulls. And Daniel was caught in the orbit of something bigger than us. I didn't mind at first. I loved watching him build. Loved the fire in his eyes when he talked about code and disruption and scaling. But slowly, so slowly I didn't notice until it was too late. I stopped being his partner. I became his audience. Here's what nobody tells you about loving ambitious men. You start as equals, and you end as support staff. If you've ever felt yourself shrinking to make room for someone else's dream, drop a comment. Tell me I'm not the only one who learned this lesson the hard way. Because what's coming next, the moment I told him about the pregnancy, it's going to make you angry. And you should be angry. Stay with me. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday. 3 pregnancy tests. 3 pink lines. 3 confirmations that my life had just changed forever. I was terrified, and exhilarated, and completely, utterly unprepared. But I truly believed, that Daniel would be happy. We'd talked about the future, marriage, kids, a house with a yard and terrible wallpaper we'd promised to change, but never would. Those late-night conversations felt like blueprints. I didn't realize they were fantasies. I waited until he got home that night. He'd been at the office until almost midnight, which had become normal. His tie was loosened. His eyes were red from staring at screens. "Can we talk?" I'd asked. He'd sighed. Not unkindly, just tired. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" "I have a 7 a.m. with investors and I really need to—" "I'm pregnant," I said. The words just came out. Unplanned. Ungraceful. But true. Daniel froze. His face went completely blank, the way a computer screen goes black before it reboots. "What?" he whispered. "I'm pregnant," I repeated, softer this time. "We're going to have a baby." I waited for the smile, the hug, the moment where he'd pull me close and tell me everything was going to be okay. It never came. Instead, Daniel sank onto the couch and put his head in his hands. Mary, he said slowly, the company is about to go public. Those were the first words out of his mouth. Not, are you okay? Not, how are you feeling? Not, we'll figure this out together. Just, the company is about to go public. Like I'd told him we had a scheduling conflict. I know the timing isn't perfect, I said carefully, sitting beside him. But we can make this work. This isn't about timing, he interrupted. This is about everything. Mary, I can't do this right now. The IPO is in 3 months. I'm working 16-hour days. I don't have time for... He stopped himself. But the damage was done. I don't have time for a baby. That's what he meant. For what? I asked quietly. You don't have time for what, Daniel? He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not fear of fatherhood. Fear of losing what he'd built. Fear that I was an obstacle to the life he wanted. I'll support you financially, he said. Whatever you need. But I can't. I'm not ready to be a father. Not now. The room tilted. So, what are you saying? I asked, even though I already knew. I'm saying, he exhaled slowly. I'm saying you need to make a choice. A choice, as if there was only one option that kept him in the picture, as if anything else was on me. I stood up, slowly, carefully, like I was made of something fragile that might shatter if I moved too fast. I've made my choice, I said. I'm keeping this baby. Daniel nodded, relieved, like I'd just solved a problem for him. Okay, he said. Okay, then I'll set up an account, transfer money monthly. We can work out the details with lawyers. Lawyers. That's when I knew. He wasn't scared. He was done. I need you to pause here. Because this moment, this is where everything broke. When I realized the man I loved saw our child as a liability. If you've ever been made to feel like you were asking for too much when all you wanted was for someone to show up, leave a comment. Share your story. Because you need to know you're not alone. And hit that like button if you're still with me. If you need to see how this ends. I packed my things that night. Not dramatically, not in anger. Just quietly. One suitcase, the essentials, the photograph of us at the beach that I should have thrown away but couldn't. Daniel watched from the doorway. Mary, you don't have to leave, he said. We can figure something out. No, I said, zipping the suitcase. We can't. Because figuring something out meant compromise, and you can't compromise on showing up for your child. A week later, $50,000 appeared in my bank account. I sent it back. He tried again. Same amount. I returned it again. The third time, he sent a message with it. Please, let me help. I blocked his number and kept the money in an account I never touched, because his guilt wasn't my responsibility. Elizabeth was born 7 months later. On a Tuesday. Early morning. Snow falling outside the hospital window. She was so small. 5 pounds, 3 ounces. With Daniel's dark hair and my stubborn chin and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. The nurse placed her in my arms, and I felt my entire world rearrange itself around this tiny, perfect human. Does Dad want to hold her? The nurse asked kindly. There is no dad, I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. And it hurt less than I expected, because I had her, and she was everything. 2 hours later, the pediatric cardiologist came in. Dr. Patel, soft-spoken, serious. Mrs. Taylor, we've detected an irregularity in Elizabeth's heart, she said gently. Those words should have destroyed me. But I'd already survived the worst betrayal of my life. A medical diagnosis? That was just another battle. And I'd already proven I knew how to fight. I almost called Daniel that day. My finger hovered over his number, the one I'd memorized before I blocked it. Your daughter has a heart condition. She might not survive. I need you. But I didn't press call. Because needing him and him showing up were two different things. And I couldn't survive him choosing his empire over our daughter twice. So I chose silence, not out of spite, out of survival. 6 months after Elizabeth was born, Daniel's company went public. I saw the headlines everywhere, couldn't escape them. Smith Technologies. IPO raises 2.3 billion. Daniel Smith becomes youngest tech billionaire. The visionary who changed cloud computing. The articles described him as focused, driven, committed to his vision. They didn't mention what he'd sacrificed to get there, who he'd left behind. I looked at those headlines while holding Elizabeth after her second open-heart surgery, while she slept in my arms with tubes and wires connecting her to machines. While I survived on hospital cafeteria coffee and hoped that was running thinner every day. He got Forbes covers. I got medical bills and sleepless nights, and a daughter who asked questions I couldn't answer. While I was sitting in hospital rooms learning words like ventricular septal defect and genetic cardiomyopathy, Daniel Smith was on magazine covers. 30 under 30. Tech's next titan. The billionaire who's changing everything. The world celebrated him while I learned how to suction mucus from a newborn's nose and sleep in chairs that destroyed your back. If that makes you angry, good. Stay angry, because when I walk into his office in the next chapter, when I force him to see what his choices cost, that anger is going to be fuel. Subscribe if you need to see him face what he walked away from. Comment if you believe in accountability. I'll see you in Chapter 3. Smith Technologies occupied floors 43 through 48 of the Meridian Tower. All glass and steel in the kind of architectural arrogance that said we're untouchable without speaking a word. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at the building that Daniel had built with the time he didn't have for us. The winter wind cut through my coat. December in the city had teeth. But I wasn't shaking from cold. I was shaking because in about 5 minutes I was going to walk into that building and ask the man who destroyed me to save the daughter he didn't know existed. And I had no idea if he'd say yes. I crossed the street. The lobby was exactly what I expected. Marble floors so polished I could see my reflection. Tired eyes, worn coat, a woman who didn't belong in spaces that cost this much. Minimalist furniture, a reception desk that looked like it cost more than my car. Everything was white and chrome and expensive. A security guard looked up as I approached. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Ma'am. Like I was someone's charity case instead of someone with business here. Which, I suppose, described the situation perfectly. "I need to see Daniel Smith," I said. The guard's expression didn't change. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "I'm sorry, but Mr. Smith doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you'd like to leave your name and contact information—" "Tell him Mary Taylor is here," I interrupted. "Tell him it's about something he left behind 9 years ago." The guard frowned, picked up his phone, spoke quietly into it. His expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. 30 seconds later, he hung up and gestured toward the elevators. 47th floor. Someone will meet you." I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. And for 47 floors, I watched the city shrink beneath me while my heart tried to climb out of my chest. What I'm about to do, confronting the man who chose money over family, this is the moment that changes everything. If you've ever had to walk into a room where you knew you'd be underestimated, judged, or dismissed, you know this feeling. That mix of rage and fear and determination. Stay with me. Because what happens when these elevator doors open, you need to see. And if this story is making you feel something, anything, subscribe. Be here for the confrontation that's been 9 years in the making. The doors opened. A woman in her 30s stood waiting. Blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun. Tailored suit. The kind of competence that radiated from people who ran billion-dollar calendars. "Mary Taylor?" she asked, extending her hand. I shook it. "I'm Amanda Chen, Mr. Smith's executive assistant." Her eyes were kind, curious. "He's finishing a call. He'll be with you in just a moment." She led me through an open-plan office space. Employees at standing desks, exposed brick walls, motivational quotes printed on glass panels like corporate scripture. Innovate or die. Disrupt everything. The future belongs to the bold. I wanted to laugh. The future Daniel was building didn't have room for the past he'd abandoned. Amanda stopped at a glass-walled conference room. "You can wait here," she said. Then, quieter. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine," I said. But I wasn't fine. I was standing in the empire my absence had helped build. Amanda hesitated at the door. I don't mean to pry, but are you okay? The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? She glanced back toward the office, then at me. Because in 3 years of working for Daniel Smith, I've never seen him look the way he did when security called up your name. Before I could respond, she left. And I was alone with my thoughts and the floor-to-ceiling windows that showed me a city Daniel owned. 2 minutes later, the door opened. And there he was. Daniel Smith, 9 years older, sharper suit, harder edges, but the same dark eyes that used to look at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Those eyes weren't soft anymore. They were careful, guarded, afraid. Mary, he said quietly. Just my name, like a confession. I stood. We stared at each other across the conference table, a distance that felt like continents. You look, he trailed off, started again. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I didn't plan on it, I said flatly. Daniel flinched. Good. He closed the door behind him, moved to the opposite side of the table but didn't sit. What are you doing here? He asked. No. How have you been? No. I'm sorry for everything. Just straight to business. Some things never change. I need your help, I said. He blinked. With what? I pulled out my phone, found the photo I'd taken yesterday, Elizabeth sleeping in her hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that were keeping her alive. I slid the phone across the table. Daniel picked it up. His face went pale. Who is this? He whispered. Her name is Elizabeth, I said. She's 8 years old. She loves art and astronomy and refuses to eat vegetables unless I hide them in pasta sauce. She wants to be a marine biologist when she grows up. I paused. She's your daughter. The phone slipped from Daniel's hand and clattered onto the table. What? The word came out strangled. Elizabeth is your daughter, I repeated, slower this time. And she's dying. Daniel sank into a chair like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. You never. He looked up at me, his face a war between shock and something that looked like grief. Why didn't you tell me? The anger I'd been holding back for 9 years erupted. Tell you? My voice rose. You made it perfectly clear you didn't have time for a child, Daniel. Or did you forget that part? The part where I told you I was pregnant and you offered me money instead of showing up? That's not... I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. I cut him off. Your company was more important. Your IPO was more important. Everything was more important than us. Daniel's hands were shaking. Mary, I was 25 years old and terrified. I didn't know how to... I was 24 and pregnant, I shot back. And I figured it out. Alone. If you've ever wanted to scream at someone who made their fear your problem, comment right now. Tell me what you'd say. Because this confrontation that should have happened 9 years ago, this is for every woman who was told she was asking for too much when all she wanted was for someone to stay. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear it. Silence filled the room. Daniel stared at the photo on the table. At Elizabeth. At the daughter he'd never met. What's wrong with her? He asked, his voice cracking. Her heart is failing, I said. Genetic cardiomyopathy. She needs a transplant. Then we get her on the list. There is no list, Daniel. I stepped closer. Her genetic profile is so rare, there's only one viable donor match worldwide. I watched understanding dawn on his face. No, he breathed. Yes. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. Daniel stood abruptly, running his hands through his hair. A gesture I remembered from years ago when he was overwhelmed. Mary, I'll do whatever it takes, whatever she needs. Money, doctors, specialists. She doesn't need your money, I said coldly. She needs your heart. The words landed like a blow. Daniel turned to face me. You're serious. The transplant team ran the international database. You're the only genetic match. I held his gaze. You're the only person on Earth who can save her life. I watched him process it. The weight of what I was asking. The cost of what he'd walked away from. When? He asked quietly. She has days. Maybe a week. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there were tears. I'll do it, he said. Whatever testing they need, whatever procedures. I'll do it. Just like that? I asked, suspicious. Just like that, he confirmed. Then softer. She's my daughter. Now she is, I said bitterly. Now that you have something to offer. But 9 years ago when I needed you to just be there. I know. His voice broke. Mary, I know. And I can't take that back. I can't fix what I did, but please, please, let me do this. I wanted to hate him. God, I wanted to hate him so badly it burned. But Elizabeth didn't have time for my hatred. The hospital needs you to come in for compatibility testing, I said. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I'll be there. This doesn't change anything between us, I added. You're doing this for her, not for me. We're not reconciling, or I understand, Daniel said quickly. I just want to help her, that's all. I picked up my phone, started toward the door. Mary, I stopped but didn't turn around. Can I? His voice was barely above a whisper. Can I meet her? Every protective instinct in my body screamed no. But then I thought of Elizabeth asking about her father, about the man she'd wondered about her entire life. Let's see if you're actually the match first, I said. One thing at a time. I walked out, left Daniel standing in that glass conference room with the photo of a daughter who looked just like him. And I didn't let myself cry until I was in my car in the parking garage where no one could see me break. 48 hours later, Dr. Ellis called me with the results. And what he said, what the test confirmed, it changed everything. Subscribe right now if you need to know what happens when the man who abandoned us becomes the only thing standing between my daughter and death. Comment below. Do you think people can change? Can someone who failed you once actually show up when it matters most? I'm about to find out. And so are you. Dr. Ellis called 2 days later. The tests confirm it, he said. Daniel is a perfect match. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something closer to dread. Because now this was real. Daniel Smith wasn't just a name from my past anymore. He was Elizabeth's only chance at a future. What happens next? I asked. We'll need to schedule a series of consultations. Prepare both of them for surgery. And Mary. Dr. Ellis paused. Elizabeth should meet him before the procedure. It helps, psychologically, if she knows who her donor is. My grip tightened on the phone. She doesn't know he's her father yet, I admitted. Then maybe it's time she did. I hung up and sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. How do you tell your 8-year-old daughter that the father she'd wondered about her entire life was about to give her his heart? Literally? How do you explain that he only showed up because her life was ending? I didn't have answers. But I had a daughter who deserved the truth. Elizabeth was awake when I got back to her room, sitting up in bed with her coloring book, humming softly to herself, a sign she was having a good day. Mama, she smiled when she saw me. Look, I finished The Mermaid. I sat on the edge of her bed, admiring the purple and green creature she'd drawn. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we hang it up? She asked. Of course. I taped it to the wall beside her bed, next to the dozen other drawings that had turned this sterile room into something that looked almost like home. Elizabeth, I said carefully, sitting back down, I need to talk to you about something important. Her eyes got serious. She was good at reading my tone. Am I getting sicker? She asked quietly. No, baby. It's not that. I took her small hand in mine. Remember how we talked about you needing a new heart? She nodded. Well, the doctors found someone who's a perfect match. Her face lit up. Really? Really? When do I get to meet them? I took a breath. Actually, you're going to meet him today. His name is Daniel. And Elizabeth. He's your father. The words hung in the air between us. Elizabeth's eyes went wide. My daddy? Yes. The one who wasn't ready? She asked, repeating the words I told her years ago. My throat tightened. Yes, that one, Is he ready now? The question was so simple, so innocent, so impossibly complex. I think he's trying to be, I said honestly. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, does he know about me? He does now. Is he nice? I wanted to say no, wanted to tell her that nice men don't abandon pregnant women. But I couldn't poison this before it started. You'll have to decide that for yourself, I said. If you're a mother watching this, you know this fear. Letting someone who hurt you near the child you've protected their whole life. It goes against every instinct. But sometimes love means stepping back even when you want to build walls. If you understand that impossible position, hit that like button and stay with me. Because what happens when Daniel walks through that door, when he meets the daughter he never knew? It's going to break something open in all of us. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. I saw him through the glass before Elizabeth did. He was carrying a stuffed animal, a dolphin, absurdly large and clearly expensive, exactly the kind of overcompensating gesture I'd expected. Amanda was with him. She gave me a small nod as they approached. I met them outside Elizabeth's room. Is that necessary? I asked, gesturing to the dolphin that was nearly the size of a small child. Daniel looked down at it like he'd forgotten he was holding it. I didn't know what to bring. The store associate said kids like dolphins. She's not kids, I said. She's Elizabeth. Right, sorry, He ran his free hand through his hair. I don't know how to do this, Mary. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. You walk in, you introduce yourself, you let her lead the conversation. I held his gaze. And Daniel? Don't make promises you can't keep. He nodded. I opened the door. Elizabeth looked up from her coloring book. Her eyes immediately went to the giant dolphin, then to Daniel, then to me. Elizabeth, I said gently, this is Daniel. Daniel stepped forward, awkward and uncertain in a way I'd never seen him. The man who commanded boardrooms looked terrified of an 8-year-old girl. Hi, he said softly. I brought you this, if you want it. He held out the dolphin. Elizabeth studied him with those serious eyes, Daniel's eyes, that seemed to see everything. Are you really my daddy? She asked. Daniel's face crumpled. Yes, I am. Where were you? The question was so simple, so devastating. Daniel glanced at me. I offered him nothing. This was his to answer. He knelt beside her bed, so they were eye level. I was scared, and I made a really bad choice. I should have been there. I should have known you, and I'm so sorry I wasn't. Elizabeth tilted her head. Are you scared now? Terrified, Daniel admitted, but not of being your dad. I'm scared of letting you down again. Something in Elizabeth's expression softened. She reached for the dolphin. What's his name? I thought maybe you could name him, Daniel said. Professor Splash, Elizabeth decided immediately. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Daniel did smile. That's perfect. And just like that, the wall I'd spent 8 years building started to crack. Over the next week, Daniel came every day, sometimes twice a day, fitting hospital visits between meetings and conference calls. At first, I watched him like a hawk, waiting for him to get bored, waiting for him to check his phone more than he listened, waiting for him to realize that being a father wasn't a project you could delegate. But he showed up. He brought coloring books and puzzles. He read to her when she was too tired to hold a book herself. He learned her favorite foods and asked the nurses if there was any way to get strawberry ice cream past the dietary restrictions. He's trying, Amanda told me one afternoon in the hallway. She'd started staying when Daniel visited, an unofficial buffer between his world and ours. Trying isn't the same as staying, I said. No, she agreed, but it's a start. I wanted to argue, wanted to protect the anger that had kept me moving forward for 8 years. But watching Daniel hold Elizabeth's hand while she fell asleep, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, made it harder to hold on to hate. Here's what they don't tell you about forgiveness. It doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks up on you in small moments. And sometimes the hardest part isn't forgiving them. It's forgiving yourself for starting to soften. If you've ever felt yourself beginning to trust someone who broke you, comment below. Tell me how you knew if it was real or just hope in disguise. And subscribe if you need to see where this goes. Because what Elizabeth asks him next changes everything. One evening, I returned from the cafeteria to find Daniel reading to Elizabeth. Not a children's book. A book about the ocean, full of facts and photographs and words that were definitely above her grade level. But she was riveted. Did you know, Daniel was saying, that dolphins can recognize themselves in mirrors? Scientists think it means they're self-aware. Like they know they're dolphins, Elizabeth asked. Exactly like that. That's why Professor Splash is so smart, she said seriously. Daniel laughed. A real laugh. The kind I remembered from before everything got complicated. Elizabeth looked up and saw me. Mama, did you know about the dolphins? I did not, I admitted, sitting in the chair across from Daniel. We fell into an easy rhythm after that. Daniel reading. Elizabeth asking questions, me pretending I wasn't memorizing the sound of them together. This is what we could have had, I thought. Birthday parties and bedtime stories and all the ordinary magic of raising a child together. If he'd chosen differently. If I'd been enough to make him stay. Mary? I realized Daniel was looking at me. Sorry, what? Elizabeth asked if we could all have dinner together, here, tomorrow night. I looked at my daughter. She was watching me with hopeful eyes. Please, Mama. I wanted to say no, wanted to keep boundaries in place, but she'd asked for so little in her short life. Okay, I said. Dinner tomorrow? Elizabeth beamed. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then silenced it without answering. Don't you need to get that? I asked. No, he said simply. I'm exactly where I need to be. Something in my chest loosened. Later, after Elizabeth had fallen asleep and Daniel was getting ready to leave, he paused at the door. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting me know her. I didn't do it for you, I replied. I know. He looked back at Elizabeth, sleeping peacefully with Professor Splash tucked under her arm. But thank you anyway. After he left, Elizabeth stirred. Mama? She murmured, half asleep. I'm here, baby. Is Daddy going to stay? She asked. After the surgery, or is he going to leave again? My heart shattered. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope he stays, she whispered. I like having a daddy. That question, is he going to stay? It haunts me. Because I want to believe people can change. I want to believe Daniel showing up now means something. But wanting to believe and actually believing are different things. If you're watching this and you've ever given someone a second chance, tell me, how did you know if you made the right choice? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because what's coming in the next chapter, the complications, the ethics board, the moment when Daniel has to choose between his life and hers, that's when we find out who he really is. The call came at 6 in the morning. Dr. Ellis. His voice carrying that weight I'd come to recognize, the tone that meant everything was about to get more complicated. Mary, we need to talk about Daniel's pre-surgical cardiac workup. I was already awake. I'd stopped sleeping through the night weeks ago. What's wrong? I asked. Can you come to the hospital? I'd rather discuss this in person. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Dr. Ellis's office while he pulled up test results on his computer screen. Daniel arrived 5 minutes after me, his hair still wet from a shower, wearing yesterday's clothes like he'd slept at the office, or hadn't slept at all. What's going on? Daniel asked, taking the chair beside me but keeping careful distance. Dr. Ellis turned the monitor toward us, charts and numbers and colored graphs that meant nothing to my untrained eye. Daniel's compatibility is perfect, he began. That hasn't changed. But the advanced cardiac imaging revealed something we didn't anticipate. My stomach dropped. What? Daniel asked. You have early-stage cardiomyopathy, Dr. Ellis said, looking directly at Daniel. It's mild, asymptomatic. You probably didn't even know you had it. But it means the transplant surgery carries significantly elevated risk. What kind of risk? I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. The donation could permanently compromise Daniel's heart function, We're talking potential heart failure within 5 to 10 years, possibly sooner. Dr. Ellis folded his hands. The ethics board is meeting this afternoon. They may delay or deny authorization for the surgery altogether. The room tilted. You're saying if he saves Elizabeth, he might die? My voice came out strangled. I'm saying his quality of life would be drastically impacted. Long-term survival becomes uncertain. Dr. Ellis looked between us. The board needs to ensure Daniel fully understands the implications before consenting. Daniel stood abruptly. I understand, and my answer is still yes. Daniel, you haven't heard. I don't need to hear more, he interrupted. Elizabeth is 8 years old. Without this transplant, she doesn't get to be 9. I'm 33. I've had 33 years. If giving her the rest of my life means I only get 10 more, that's a trade I'll make. It's not that simple, Dr. Ellis said. The ethics committee exists precisely for situations like this. They need to determine if you're making this decision under emotional duress. If I'm making it as her father, Daniel said firmly. What would you do if saving your child meant someone else might not survive? Not a stranger? The person who gave them life in the first place? It's an impossible question. There's no right answer. If you're watching this and your heart is breaking for what's coming, subscribe. Because this is where the story stops being about betrayal and becomes about sacrifice. And you need to see how this ends. Dr. Ellis left us alone to process the information, as if there was anything to process, as if we weren't trapped in an impossible choice designed by a cruel universe. Silence filled the office, the kind that presses against your eardrums. You don't have to do this, I said finally. Daniel looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Yes, I do. Daniel, if you do this surgery, you might die in 5 years, maybe 10 if you're lucky, your whole life. My life doesn't matter, he interrupted. Of course it matters. Not more than hers? His voice broke. Mary, 9 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I walked away from you, from us, from the family we could have been. And I've spent every single day since then building an empire that meant absolutely nothing. Tears were streaming down his face now. I've been so successful. Forbes lists an acquisition deals worth hundreds of millions. But none of it mattered. Because the one thing that should have mattered most, I threw away like it was disposable. He turned to face me fully. I don't get to make that choice again, he said. I don't get to choose my life over hers. Not this time. Not ever. But what if Elizabeth grows up and asks me why you left? My voice cracked. What if she has to live with the guilt that you died to save her? Then you tell her the truth, Daniel said. You tell her that loving her was the first thing I did right, the only thing that mattered. I stood, unable to sit still with the weight of this conversation. I spent 9 years hating you, I said. 9 years telling myself you were selfish and cruel and incapable of putting anyone before yourself. And now you're willing to die for a daughter you've known for 2 weeks? Yes. Why? I demanded. Why now? Where was this person when I needed him? Where were you when I was alone and terrified and giving birth to our child with no one beside me? Daniel stood too. We faced each other across Dr. Ellis's desk. I was a coward, he said. I was 25 and terrified, and I convinced myself that success was the same thing as worth. That if I built something big enough, I'd matter. But I was wrong, Mary. I've been wrong about everything that truly counts. That doesn't change the past. No, he agreed. But maybe it changes the future. Maybe Elizabeth gets to have one because I finally showed up. Before I could respond, the door burst open. A nurse, one I didn't recognize, breathless and urgent. Dr. Ellis needs you both, now. It's Elizabeth. My blood turned to ice. We ran. Down hallways that blurred together, past startled visitors and hurried staff members, through double doors that led to the pediatric cardiac unit. Elizabeth's room was full of people, doctors, nurses, machines screaming in alarm. Dr. Ellis was at her bedside, calling orders in that calm crisis voice, "Doctors, perfect." What happened? I pushed through to Elizabeth's side. She's in acute heart failure, Dr. Ellis said, without looking away from the monitors. We're stabilizing her now, but Mary, we're out of time. I grabbed Elizabeth's hand. It was cold, too cold. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. scared. Mama? I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I don't feel good, she whispered. I know, sweetheart. The doctors are helping. Daniel appeared on the other side of the bed, his face sheet white, his hands shaking. Elizabeth turned her head slightly. Saw him. Managed a weak smile. Hi, Daddy. Daniel's face crumpled completely. Hi, sweetheart. Are you staying? The question, asked in her fading voice, broke him. Yes, he said through tears. I'm staying. I promise. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled. Then her eyes closed. Dr. Ellis pulled me aside while the team worked frantically. The ethics board meets in 90 minutes, he said quietly. But if her condition continues to deteriorate at this rate, how long does she have? I asked. Hours. Maybe until morning if we're lucky. Not days anymore. Not even one full day. Hours. We've run out of time. The ethics board hasn't approved the surgery. Elizabeth is dying. And Daniel is the only thing standing between my daughter and death. But saving her might kill him. If you've stayed with me this far, don't leave now. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. Comment and tell me you're here. Because what happens next, the choice the ethics board makes, the surgery that could save one life and end another, you need to see it. Share this with someone who understands that love is never simple, that sacrifice is never clean, that sometimes there are no good choices, only impossible ones. The ethics board approved the surgery at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight, 13 minutes before Elizabeth's second day in acute heart failure. Dr. Ellis called me personally. We have unanimous authorization, he said. Surgery is scheduled for 6 a.m. 6 hours away, 6 hours to pray I wouldn't lose them both. I didn't sleep. Neither did Daniel. We sat on opposite sides of Elizabeth's hospital bed, watching machines breathe for her, both of us silent with the weight of what morning would bring. At 4 a.m., Elizabeth woke up, groggy from medication but conscious. Is it time? She asked, her voice so small it hurt. Almost, baby, I said, brushing hair from her forehead. She looked at Daniel. Are you scared? Terrified, he admitted. Me too, she whispered. Then, will it hurt? You'll be asleep, I promised. You won't feel anything. What about Daddy? Daniel leaned forward, taking her small hand in both of his. I'll be okay, sweetheart, I promise. But you're giving me your heart, Elizabeth said, with the logic only children possess. What will you use? Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. I'll still have enough. More than enough. Because the best part of my heart is going to you. Elizabeth smiled weakly. That's a good line, Daddy. Despite everything, we laughed. Soft and broken, but real. At 5:30, the surgical team came. They prepped Elizabeth first. Gave her something to calm her nerves. Her eyes started to droop. Mama? She murmured. I'm here. I love you 3000. It was a line from a movie we'd watched together 100 times, our private language for more than anything in the universe. I love you 3000, I whispered back, my voice breaking. They wheeled her away, and I watched my entire world disappear through double doors marked surgical unit, authorized personnel only. If you've ever watched someone you love disappear through hospital doors and felt like you were being torn in half, you know this moment. That helplessness. That terror. If you're here because you need to know she survives this, subscribe right now. Stay with me through the hardest part. Because what happens in the next few hours will test everything. Daniel was prepped in a room down the hall. I wasn't planning to see him before surgery. Our last conversation felt like enough. But Amanda found me in the waiting room. He's asking for you, she said quietly. I followed her. Daniel was on a gurney, already in a hospital gown, IV in his arm, monitors attached to his chest. He looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way the suits and boardrooms never allowed. Mary, he said when he saw me. I stood in the doorway, unsure. Can we have a moment? Daniel asked the nurse. She nodded and stepped out. We were alone. I wanted to say, Daniel started, then stopped. Tried again. I don't know what to say, actually. Everything sounds wrong. Then don't say anything, I replied. I have to. He looked at me with those eyes that used to make me believe in forever. Because if something goes wrong in that operating room, don't. Mary, please, let me say this. He took a shaky breath. 9 years ago, I was the worst version of myself. I let fear make every decision. I chose wrong, and I've regretted it every single day since. Tears were building behind my eyes. These past 3 weeks, getting to know Elizabeth, seeing who you became without me, watching you be the strongest person I've ever known, it's shown me everything I lost. Everything I threw away because I was too much of a coward to see what mattered. Daniel, I love her, he said. I know I don't have the right to say that after 3 weeks. But I do. I love her so much it terrifies me. I know, I whispered. And Mary, his voice dropped. I never stopped loving you. The words hit like a physical blow. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice shaking. Not now. Not when... I know the timing is terrible, he interrupted. I know I don't deserve forgiveness or a second chance or anything from you. But if something happens in there, I needed you to know. I needed you to hear it from me. The anesthesiologist knocked on the door. We need to take him now. Daniel's eyes never left mine. Take care of her. And Mary, tell her I was proud to be her father. Even if it was only for a little while. They wheeled him away before I could respond. Before I could tell him that I'd never stopped loving him either. That I'd tried. God, I'd tried. But love doesn't die just because you want it to. The waiting room became my prison. 6 chairs with worn cushions. 1 television on mute showing morning news. A clock that moved too slowly. Amanda sat with me. She didn't try to make conversation or offer empty platitudes. Just brought coffee I didn't drink and stayed because being alone felt impossible. 2 hours into surgery, Dr. Patel, the pediatric surgeon, came out. Elizabeth is doing well, she said. The transplant is proceeding as planned. And Daniel? I asked. A pause. Brief, but devastating. There have been some complications with the extraction. My world stopped. What kind of complications? His heart is under more strain than anticipated. It stopped briefly during the procedure. She held up a hand before I could panic. We had him back in 90 seconds, but the surgical team is proceeding with extreme caution. Is he going to die? The words came out strangled. I don't know, Dr. Patel admitted. I'm sorry. I'll update you as soon as I know more. She left, and I broke. 9 years of anger and pain and carefully constructed walls collapsed. I sank into a chair and sobbed. Ugly, gasping, broken sounds I couldn't control. Amanda's hand found my shoulder. He can't die, I choked out. He just got here. He just started being her father. She'll never forgive me if he's not going to die, Amanda said firmly, though her voice shook. That man doesn't give up. Not anymore. 3 hours became 4. 4 became 5. Every minute stretched into eternity. I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Made bargains I had no authority to make. Promised things I couldn't deliver. Anything, everything. Just let them both survive. Have you ever made promises to the universe in moments of desperation? Bargains you knew you couldn't keep, but made anyway because hope was all you had left? Comment below if you've been here. In this waiting room where time stops and fear is the only thing that's real, because I need to know I'm not alone in this terror. At 1:47 p.m., the surgical doors opened. Dr. Ellis emerged, still in scrubs, mask pulled down, face exhausted, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. I stood. My legs barely supported me. Doctor? My voice was barely a whisper. Amanda stood beside me, her hand gripping mine. Dr. Ellis walked toward us, and each step felt like a lifetime. When he reached me, his smile widened. She made it, he said. Mary, Elizabeth made it. The heart is functioning perfectly. I collapsed into Amanda's arms, sobbing with relief so intense it hurt. And Daniel? Amanda asked the question I couldn't form. Dr. Ellis's expression shifted. Still positive, but tempered. He's alive. The surgery was complicated. His heart stopped twice during extraction, and we had significant challenges with bleeding. He's in critical condition in the ICU. But he'll survive, I managed. His prognosis is guarded but hopeful. The next 72 hours are critical. He'll need intensive monitoring, and his recovery will be longer than anticipated. Dr. Ellis put a hand on my shoulder. But Mary, they're both alive. The world came back into focus. The waiting room, the clock, the television still playing soundlessly. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. When can I see them? I asked. Elizabeth is in recovery now. You can see her in about 45 minutes. Daniel will be in ICU for at least the next 2 days. He needs to stabilize before we allow visitors, but I'll make sure you're the first to know when he can have company. After he left, I sat in that waiting room and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Relief, gratitude, terror, love. So much love it hurt. For Elizabeth. For the life she'd get to live. And for Daniel. The man who'd broken me and then saved us both. They survived, both of them. But survival is just the beginning. What comes next? Recovery, healing, learning how to be a family when you've never been one before. That's the real work. If you need to see how we rebuild from broken pieces, subscribe. Because the next chapter is about what happens when the crisis ends and real life begins. When the machines stop beeping and you're left with the quiet truth of who you've become. Stay with me. Elizabeth woke up 2 hours after surgery, groggy, confused, but alive. Her eyes found mine immediately. Mama? I was at her bedside in seconds, careful not to disturb the dozen wires and tubes keeping her monitored. I'm here, baby. Did it work? She whispered. Tears streamed down my face. Yes, sweetheart. You have a new heart. Daddy's heart? Yes. She smiled, weak but real. Is he okay? That question. That beautiful, selfless question from a child who'd just survived heart transplant surgery. He's okay, I promised. He's resting just like you need to. Can I see him? Soon, I said. You both need to heal first. She nodded, already drifting back to sleep. The surgery had taken everything from her small body. But she was alive. And that was everything. Recovery was not the fairy tale ending I'd imagined during those desperate weeks of waiting. It was slow, painful, frustrating. Elizabeth's body initially rejected the new heart. Episodes that sent nurses rushing and my anxiety spiraling. Medications that made her nauseous. Physical therapy sessions that left her exhausted and crying. I hate this, she sobbed one afternoon, 6 weeks post-surgery. I just want to feel normal. I held her while she cried, feeling helpless in a way I hadn't since the diagnosis. I know, baby. I know it's hard. But slowly, so slowly, her body accepted what Daniel had given her. The rejection episodes decreased. Her energy returned in small increments. Color came back to her cheeks. She started smiling again. Really smiling. Daniel's recovery was harder. The surgery had damaged his heart more severely than the surgical team anticipated. He spent 8 days in ICU, then 3 weeks in cardiac recovery. I visited him once, 7 days after surgery. He was asleep when I arrived, or pretending to be. Hard to tell with all the monitors and medications. He looked diminished, somehow. The billionaire CEO replaced by a man in a hospital gown, who'd nearly died twice giving his daughter a chance at life. I stood in the doorway, watching him breathe with mechanical assistance, wondering who we were to each other now. Not lovers, not enemies. Something undefined and complicated. Parents, I supposed, though we'd never been that together before. His eyes opened. Found me immediately. Mary, he said, his voice rough from intubation. I shouldn't have come, I said. You need rest. No, stay, please. I stayed. Sat in the chair beside his bed, maintaining careful distance. How is she? Daniel asked. Strong, stubborn, asking about you constantly. He smiled weakly. She gets the stubborn from you. And the fear of vegetables from you, apparently. We both laughed softly, carefully, like people relearning how to exist in the same space. Thank you, I said finally, for what you did. For her. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. I met his eyes. You gave her everything, and I'll never forget that. Daniel's expression shifted. Mary, I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because, I know, I interrupted, but I'm thanking you anyway. Gratitude and forgiveness aren't the same thing. You can be grateful someone showed up without forgiving them for the years they didn't. If you understand that complexity, that messy middle ground where nothing is clean or simple, leave a comment. Tell me how you navigated it. Because I'm still figuring this out. And subscribe if you need to see where this complicated road leads. By week 8, Elizabeth was strong enough to leave her room in a wheelchair. Daniel was discharged to outpatient care with strict activity limitations, and we had to figure out what co-parenting looked like when you'd never parented together. It was awkward at first. Daniel would visit, bring books and puzzles, stay for an hour, maybe 2, then leave before it got too comfortable. We spoke in careful, polite sentences, coordinated schedules, discussed medications and doctor's appointments like colleagues managing a project. We were professionals playing house, but Elizabeth was watching. Why don't you and Daddy talk more? She asked one evening after Daniel had left. We talk, I said. Not really. You talk about me, but not to each other. Children see everything you think you're hiding. It's complicated, sweetheart. Because he left before? I sighed. Yes, because he left before. But he came back, Elizabeth said simply. Doesn't that count? Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. Week 10 brought a new complication, the media. Someone at the hospital leaked the story. Billionaire. CEO saves daughter. He never knew existed with life-threatening donation. The headlines were everywhere. News sites, social media, tabloids turning our private pain into public consumption. A hospital employee had sold the story to a tabloid for $15,000. Security footage, medical records, everything we'd tried to keep private was now entertainment. Reporters camped outside the hospital, outside my apartment, called my phone until I changed the number. Daniel's office released a terse statement. Mr. Smith requests privacy during this medical recovery and will not be commenting on personal matters. But the pressure intensified. Interview requests, book deals, movie rights offers. People wanted to profit from our trauma. I was leaving the hospital one evening when a reporter cornered me in the parking garage. Mrs. Taylor, how does it feel knowing your daughter is alive because of the man who abandoned you? I stared at her, at the camera crew behind her, at the microphone shoved in my face like a weapon. No comment, I said, pushing past. But the question haunted me, because I didn't have a simple answer. Daniel called that night. I'm handling this, he said, his voice still weak but determined. My legal team is issuing cease and desist orders to anyone harassing you or Elizabeth. You can't stop the story, Daniel. No, but I can control the narrative. 3 days later, Daniel held a press conference from the hospital's media room. I watched from home, Elizabeth asleep beside me on the couch. He stood at a podium, looking thinner than before surgery but steady. Determined. Amanda stood just off camera. I'm not here to defend my past choices, he began, his voice clear. 9 years ago, I failed the woman I loved and the child we created together. I let fear and ambition blind me to what mattered most, and I've lived with that regret every single day since. The room was silent except for camera shutters. When I learned about Elizabeth, about her condition, I was given something I didn't deserve, a second chance. Not to erase my mistakes, those can never be erased, but to show up when it mattered. So I did. And I would make that choice again. Every single time. A reporter shouted a question. Daniel ignored it. My daughter is not a story for your consumption, he continued, his voice hardening. She's an 8-year-old girl who loves dolphins and hates broccoli and wants to be a marine biologist. She deserves privacy, She deserves dignity, and anyone who violates that will face every legal consequence available. He paused, gripping the podium. I didn't do this for redemption. I didn't do it for publicity or to rehabilitate my image. I did it because I love my daughter. That's the only statement I'll ever make on this matter. Thank you. He walked off stage without taking questions. I watched the screen go dark and felt something shift inside me. Daniel wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just showing up, day after day, visit after visit, without fanfare or expectation. Here's what I learned about trust. It's not rebuilt with apologies. It's rebuilt with consistency, with someone showing up on the hard days and the boring days and the days when there's no audience watching. If you've ever had to decide whether to trust someone who hurt you, share this. Because that decision, to let someone back in or keep the walls up, it's never simple. Comment and tell me, what made you finally trust again? By week 12, we'd fallen into a rhythm. Daniel came every other day. Sometimes more if Elizabeth asked. He learned her medication schedule, her therapy routines, the way she needed her blanket folded just so to feel safe. He remembered that she liked her toast cut diagonally, not straight across. That she needed 3 stories before bed, not 2. That when she was scared, she didn't want to talk about it. She just wanted someone to sit beside her in silence. He was learning to be her father. Not with money or grand gestures, but with presence. One afternoon, I arrived at the hospital to find Daniel reading to Elizabeth. She was curled against his side, eyes closed, listening to his voice. He looked up when I entered, smiled. Not the practiced CEO smile. Something real. She wanted to hear about the ocean again, he said softly. She always does, I replied. Elizabeth stirred. Mama, can Daddy come to dinner at our house? I froze. Our house. The apartment Daniel had never seen. The space that had been ours, mine and Elizabeth's, for 9 years. I don't know if that's... Please, Elizabeth asked. I want to show him my room. I looked at Daniel. He was carefully neutral, letting me decide. Okay, I said finally. Dinner at our place. Elizabeth beamed, and I tried to ignore the flutter of nervousness in my chest. Inviting Daniel into the home I'd built without him felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But Elizabeth wanted her father there. And maybe I was starting to want that too. If you're still with me, if you need to see how we navigate this impossible middle ground between forgiveness and self-protection, subscribe. Because what comes next? Daniel in our space, seeing the life we lived without him? That's when things get real. That's when we stop hiding behind hospital rooms and start facing what we might become. I'll see you in Chapter 8. Daniel came to dinner on a Tuesday. He arrived at 6:30, exactly when I told him to, holding a reusable grocery bag. I brought ingredients for pasta, he said from the doorway. Elizabeth mentioned it's her favorite. Not flowers, not wine, not some expensive gesture meant to impress. Just pasta ingredients because our daughter liked pasta. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Daniel entered the apartment I'd called home for 9 years, the space where I'd raised Elizabeth alone, where every piece of furniture told a story he wasn't part of. His eyes swept the living room. Elizabeth's drawings covering one entire wall, mismatched furniture from thrift stores and hand-me-downs, a life built on determination rather than money. It's perfect, he said quietly. It's small, I corrected. It's a home. He looked at me. That's more than perfect. Elizabeth emerged from her room, moving more confidently now, her color better than it had been in months. Daddy, she hugged him, still gentle, mindful of both their healing hearts. Hey, sweetheart, ready to show me your room? She took his hand and led him down the hallway. I stayed in the kitchen, unpacking groceries, listening to Elizabeth's excited voice explaining her marine biology posters and rock collection. Listening to Daniel ask questions like he genuinely cared about the answers. Because he did care. That was the thing I couldn't reconcile. The Daniel I'd loved 9 years ago and the Daniel who'd walked away were the same person as the man in my daughter's bedroom learning about tide pools. People contained multitudes, even the ones who'd broken you. We made pasta together. All 3 of us. Daniel chopped vegetables, creating uneven chunks that made me wince, but he was trying. Elizabeth set the table with exaggerated care. I supervised and tried not to notice how natural this felt. How easily we'd fallen into a rhythm that looked almost like family. Over dinner, Elizabeth asked Daniel about his work. "Are you still doing the computer stuff?" Daniel smiled. "Sort of, but I'm not doing as much as I used to." "Why not?" He glanced at me, then back to Elizabeth. "Because I have more important things to focus on now." "Like what?" "Like you," he said simply. "Like being your dad." Elizabeth considered this. "But don't you have to work?" "I do. But I don't have to work all the time. I spent too many years thinking I did. I was wrong." "What changed?" she asked, with the directness only children possess. Daniel set down his fork, looked at her seriously. "I learned that the only thing that lasts, the only thing that really matters, is the people you love. Everything else is just noise." After dinner, Elizabeth fell asleep on the couch during a movie, exhausted from the most normal evening she'd had in months. Daniel and I cleaned up in silence. "She's getting stronger every day," he said, drying dishes. "She is. You did an incredible job raising her." The compliment caught me off guard. "I did what any mother would do." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You did what most people couldn't. You raised a kind, smart, brave child completely on your own. That's not nothing, Mary. That's everything." I set down the dish I was washing. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" He turned to face me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've done the heroic thing. You saved her life. You've visited. You've played the reformed father role perfectly. You could walk away now with a clear conscience and good publicity." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" His voice was quiet. "Playing a role?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what to think about any of this." Here's the truth about healing. It's not linear. Some days you believe people can change. Other days you're terrified you're being fooled again. If you've ever been caught between wanting to trust someone and protecting yourself from getting hurt, leave a comment. Tell me I'm not alone in this fear, and stay with me. Because what Daniel says next, it changes something fundamental between us. Daniel dried his hands slowly, deliberately. 4 months ago, my life looked perfect on paper, he said. $1 billion company, magazine covers, invitations to speak at conferences around the world. But Mary, I was miserable, successful, and utterly empty. He leaned against the counter. Then you walked into my office and told me about Elizabeth, and it was like waking up from a dream I'd mistaken for life. Everything I'd built suddenly meant nothing compared to what I'd thrown away. "So this is guilt," I said. "No, this is clarity." He met my eyes. "I'm not here because I feel obligated. I'm here because for the first time in 9 years, I'm exactly where I want to be." "Daniel?" "I stepped down as CEO 3 weeks ago," he said. I froze. "What?" "I'm staying on the board, still involved strategically, but I promoted my COO, Amanda, to CEO. She's brilliant, more than capable. The company is in better hands than mine." "Why would you do that?" "Because Elizabeth has therapy 3 times a week and I want to take her. Because she has checkups every 2 weeks and I want to be there. Because she's going to start school again soon and I want to do pickups and drop-offs and help with homework and all the ordinary things I missed." His voice cracked. "I don't want to be the father who shows up for the big moments and misses everything in between. I want to be there for the boring parts, the hard parts, the parts that don't make headlines." I couldn't speak. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Daniel continued. "I know I don't deserve that. But I'm asking you to let me prove I've changed. Not with words, with time, with showing up, every single day." Tears were streaming down my face. "I'm scared," I whispered. "Of what?" "Of believing you, of letting Elizabeth believe you, and then watching you leave again when this gets hard or boring or inconvenient." Daniel stepped closer, not touching, just present. "Mary, I can't promise I'll be perfect. I'll mess up. I'll make mistakes. But I will never, ever walk away from her again, from either of you. You can't know that. Yes, I can." His voice was steel wrapped in gentleness. "Because I've lived 9 years without you, without her. And it nearly destroyed me. I'm not going back to that life. Not for anything. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Elizabeth's soft breathing from the living room. I need time, I said finally. Take all the time you need, Daniel replied. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next weeks, Daniel proved it. He showed up for Elizabeth's physical therapy sessions, sat through boring appointments, learned medical terminology and medication schedules. He rearranged his entire life around our daughter's needs. I watched him arrive at the hospital at 7 a.m. for checkups, eyes red from working all night to clear his schedule. Watched him cancel board meetings to attend Elizabeth's first day back at school. Watched him choose her, again and again. Not with grand gestures, with presence. One afternoon, I arrived at school pickup to find Daniel already there, chatting easily with other parents like he'd been doing this for years. Elizabeth ran to him first. Daddy, I got an A on my science project. He scooped her up, carefully, mindful of healing hearts, and spun her once. That's my marine biologist, he said, beaming. She hugged him, then ran to hug me. Mama, can we get ice cream? All three of us? I looked at Daniel over her head. He was watching me with something that looked like hope. Ice cream sounds perfect, I said. Forgiveness doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in 100 small ones. Ice cream trips and therapy sessions and someone remembering your daughter likes her toast cut diagonally. If you've ever watched someone earn back your trust one ordinary day at a time, hit that subscribe button, because that's what real change looks like. Not perfect, just persistent. Share this if you believe in second chances that are actually earned. That night, after Elizabeth was asleep, Daniel lingered at the door. Thank you, he said, for today, for letting me be part of this. You're her father, I said. You don't need permission. I do, though. You're the one who's been here from the beginning. I'm still earning my place. I studied him. This man who'd broken me and saved us, who'd been my greatest pain and Elizabeth's greatest gift. You're doing a good job, I said quietly, at being her dad. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. That means everything coming from you. Don't make me regret saying it, he smiled. I'll do my best. As he left, he paused. Mary, I know you need time, and I respect that, but I want you to know, I'm not just choosing Elizabeth, I'm choosing you too, both of you. For as long as you'll let me. Before I could respond, he was gone. And I stood in my doorway, watching his car disappear down the street, feeling something I hadn't felt in 9 years. Hope. We're almost at the end now. The surgery is over. The recovery is progressing. Daniel is showing up. But here's what nobody tells you about healing. The hardest part isn't surviving the crisis. It's figuring out who you become after. It's deciding if broken things can be made whole again, or if you build something new from the pieces. Subscribe if you need to see how this ends. If you need to know if love that died can be resurrected. Or if what comes next is something even better. I'll see you in the final chapter, where we find out what happens when ordinary becomes extraordinary. 6 months after surgery, Elizabeth ran for the first time. Not a jog, not a careful walk, a full, uninhibited, arms-pumping, hair-flying run across the park where we'd spent so many afternoons watching other children play while she caught her breath on benches. Mama, look, she shouted, her voice carried on wind that didn't steal her oxygen anymore. I watched my daughter, alive, strong, thriving, and felt something break open in my chest. Not breaking like shattering, breaking like a dam that had held back too much for too long. Daniel stood beside me, his hand finding mine without asking permission. I didn't pull away. She's incredible, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She always was, I said. You're just getting to see it now. He squeezed my hand. Thank you for letting me. Elizabeth ran back to us, barely winded, her cheeks flushed with exertion and pure joy. Did you see? Did you see how fast I was? I saw, Daniel said, kneeling to her level. You're like lightning. Or a dolphin, she corrected. Dolphins are way faster than lightning. I don't think that's scientifically. Daddy, just let me have this. We laughed. All three of us. The sound of family I'd stopped believing we could be. That night, after Elizabeth was asleep, in her own bed, in our apartment that had started to feel like our apartment instead of mine, Daniel and I sat on the balcony. The city hummed below us, lives being lived, stories unfolding in every lit window. Ours was just one among millions, but it was ours. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence we'd learned to share. About? About everything. The past 9 years. The last 7 months. Where we go from here. My stomach tightened. "Daniel, I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or forget what happened or pretend we're something we're not." "Then what are you asking?" He turned to face me. "I'm asking for permission to keep showing up, to keep being Elizabeth's father, to keep trying to earn a place in your life. Not as the man I was, but as the man I'm becoming." The city lights reflected in his eyes, those same dark eyes that had promised me forever once before. But promises made in desperation mean nothing. It's the promises kept in ordinary moments that matter. "You don't need my permission to be her father," I said. "You've already proven you are. But I need your permission to be more than that." His voice was steady, certain. "I need to know if there's a chance, someday, that we could be a family. Not just co-parents, but something real." This is the moment where I have to decide. Do I let the past define the future? Or do I choose hope over fear? If you've ever stood at this crossroads between protecting yourself and taking a risk on someone who hurt you, you know how terrifying this is. Comment below and tell me what you chose. Tell me if you regret it or if it was worth it. Because your stories matter, your choices matter, and I need to know how this ends for you before I can know how it ends for us. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I know. Not just of you leaving again, but of believing this is real and waking up to discover it was just guilt or obligation wearing the mask of love." Daniel reached for my hand. I let him take it. "Mary, I can't prove the future. I can only show you the present. And every single day for the past 7 months I've chosen you and Elizabeth. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because being with you feels like coming home after 9 years of being lost." Tears slid down my cheeks. "The man you fell in love with 9 years ago was ambitious and scared and selfish," he continued. "I can't bring him back. He's gone. But the man I am now, the one who knows what it costs to lose you, he's not going anywhere, not unless you tell him to." I thought about the past 7 months. Daniel at therapy sessions, learning medical terminology like a second language. Daniel reading bedtime stories with voices that made Elizabeth giggle. Daniel showing up on hard days and boring days and days when there was nothing dramatic happening, just life. He'd restructured his entire world around us, not with money. With time. The most valuable thing a man like Daniel Smith could give. "I'm not ready to say I love you," I said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I can wait. But I'm also not ready to say goodbye," I continued. "So maybe we just keep doing this, keep showing up, keep learning each other, and see where it leads." Daniel's face broke into the most genuine smile I'd seen from him in 9 years. "I'll take keep showing up over anything else," he said. "That's all I'm asking for." Love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and patient and built on 1,000 ordinary choices to stay when leaving would be easier. If that resonates with you, if you believe in love that's earned, not declared, share this story. Let it reach someone who needs to know that broken things can become beautiful again. Not fixed. Just transformed into something new. 3 months later, Elizabeth turned 9. We celebrated in the apartment. No fancy venue, no catered event, just homemade cake and decorations Elizabeth had insisted on making herself. The theme was ocean creatures, naturally. Daniel arrived early to help set up, carrying streamers and a smile that had become as familiar as breathing. "Professor Splash needs a party hat," Elizabeth declared, holding up her giant stuffed dolphin. "Obviously," Daniel agreed, fashioning one from construction paper with surgical precision. I watched them together. This father and daughter who'd only known each other for 10 months, but fit together like they'd been family forever. Amanda came, and Dr. Ellis, and Elizabeth's two best friends from school who didn't know she'd almost died, and that's exactly how we wanted it. We sang Happy Birthday off-key. Elizabeth blew out 9 candles and made a wish she refused to share. And for the first time in 9 years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. That night, after everyone had left and Elizabeth was asleep, Daniel stayed to help clean up. We worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from time and trust slowly rebuilt. She asked me today if we were getting back together, Daniel said, washing dishes. What did you tell her? That grown-up relationships are complicated, and that the most important thing was that both her parents loved her and weren't going anywhere. Good answer, I said. But Mary? He dried his hands. If you ever want to try, really try, I'm here. Not pushing, just available. I set down the dish towel and looked at this man who'd broken my heart and saved my daughter's life. Who'd learned that love isn't about grand gestures but daily choices. Who'd proven that people can change if they're willing to do the work. Maybe, I said. Someday, but not today. Someday works for me, Daniel replied. And I believed him. Because he'd earned belief. One therapy session at a time, one school pickup at a time, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for witnessing our journey, for understanding that forgiveness isn't weakness and second chances aren't given, they're earned. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories where women survive impossible choices and come out stronger. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear that endings can become beginnings. Comment and tell me your story, because we're all just doing our best to figure out how to love and heal and choose hope when fear would be easier. You're not alone in this. None of us are. 6 months after that birthday, Daniel asked me to dinner. Not at the apartment, not at a hospital, at a restaurant where we didn't have to be anything other than 2 people learning to choose each other again. Is this a date? I asked. Only if you want it to be. I thought about it, about everything we'd survived, everything we'd built from the wreckage. Yeah, I said. I think I do. His smile could have lit the entire city. We didn't rush into anything, didn't erase the past or pretend the pain hadn't happened. But we chose each other. Slowly. Carefully. With eyes wide open and hearts that had learned the difference between promises and presence. Elizabeth thrived. Stronger every day. Already planning her future as a marine biologist who would definitely discover a new species and name it something cool, like Elizabeth's awesome jellyfish. Daniel kept showing up. Not as the billionaire CEO, as a father, as a partner, as a man who'd learned that the only empire worth building was the one that happened around dinner tables and homework and bedtime stories. And me? I learned that survival and living are different things. That healing isn't linear. That love can die and be reborn as something stronger. Not because it was perfect, but because it was chosen every single day. That sometimes the person who breaks you is also the person who teaches you what real love looks like, not because of who they were, but because of who they chose to become. He once broke my heart, but loving him again, slowly, carefully, with wisdom earned through pain, that didn't just save my daughter's life. It saved all of ours.